So thank you very much for joining me today. I'm delighted to be here sharing this space with Samira.
Hi, good
Hello,
evening.
how's it going? How are you?
Good, how are you?
It's great to be here. It's rainy in London. It's been a pretty busy and hectic day.
Yeah,
But yeah, very excited to be here and to meet you in the online space. Um, and I suppose it's historic this moment because it's the first ever MEP interview with Instagram Live on
I feel
EJS. And
honored.
hopefully it's start of a journey. So
I feel
you'll be in
honored.
the book of history of EJS
Thank you.
for a while. Um, we'll just allow a few more people to join in. I would just set the notification so a few more people should be able to join us.
Sure.
I'm going to connect my AirPods because I'm not actually connected.
There you are.
Right, that should be working,
Yes.
hopefully. So we're going to keep it pretty informal. It's basically just a chance to get to know one of the most exciting new faces in the European Parliament, Samira Rafaela,
Thank you.
and mostly an opportunity for you guys, for our audience, to ask questions as well. We'll keep the conversation based around the topics of anti-racism, given the sort of current events with the Black Lives Matter movement, as well as the sort of wider anti-racist struggle that we've been taking part in for decades as EJS and as a community. We'll talk about your experience as a young person in the European Parliament. We'll talk about gender issues and women's rights, another very important issue. And yeah, I guess we can kick the conversation off just by a quick introduction. And I'm Olaf Sander. I am one of the elected EJS vice presidents. I suppose my main passion in UJS is anti-racist activity, and that's building solidarity networks with other oppressed communities and with communities all around Europe to really unite in our fight. So we've been standing with the Kurdish people, with the Uyghurs in China. We're running a lot of campaigns, standing in solidarity based on the central belief of UJS that human rights are Jewish rights and Jewish rights are human rights. And our mission isn't just to combat incentives, but it's to fight for human rights worldwide as they are under attack and not to be complacent
Yeah.
in this fight. And I'm sure that a lot of your work is based around that as well. I've been elected last year together with 6 other board members and President Bini, who's watching, I think, right now. Um, and yeah, EUJS is sort of the biggest network representing student unions across Europe. We've got over 160,000 members that we represent around Europe, and a very diverse umbrella with a whole range of views. And I hope that there's going to be a lot of interesting questions and observations today from people all around. So if I could just briefly introduce Samira, you're a Dutch MEP from the D66 party in the Renew Europe group. And your background is absolutely fascinating. So you're a half Jewish, half Muslim, Dutch, Curaçaoan, Ghanaian, Nigerian person, which is an incredible story. And someone who was born in Poland with Swedish roots as well and living in the UK, I could
Nice.
kind of relate, but it's not quite as diverse to me as your experience. So um, why don't we start with your route to the European Parliament and the kind of was the one trigger moment that inspired you to go into politics, or was it more of a long-term journey?
Mm. Well, thank you so much for your nice words. Thank you. And it's very important that we are going to have this conversation today. And it's been a long journey for me, but I did know that from, I think, yeah, 16 years old, 16, that I knew that I wanted to go into politics and that I wanted to go into the European Parliament. And I was myself very triggered, of course, by having a diverse background myself, and that really gave me so much knowledge about the world, and I'm very proud to have that identity, but it also showed me the implications of being different. And I've been learned that that people were not treated equally, and that the social welfare was not equally divided. So that really triggered me on a very young age, because you also see what happens to your parents, and you know, my own history, and that confronted me really, really young. So that's really why I wanted to go into politics. And you know, after that, when I did my studies and I started to work for the city of Amsterdam, but also for the police in the Netherlands, I realized that we have so much work to do. So in 2019, I was elected, and the year before that, in 2018, I decided, like, officially to run for the European elections.
Wow. And that is really fascinating, actually, how, you know, you've had that experience of working with the police as well. I'm sure that's something that we're going to touch on later. But do you feel like your diverse identity has mostly helped you in your political route, or has there been any experience that you faced of kind of barriers, structural, systemic discrimination? And if you're willing to share some of that, perhaps, and what you
Yes.
learned from it.
No, I definitely know what structural and what institutional discrimination and racism is. I mean, I have my personal experiences with that, being underestimated, being discriminated, being excluded because of my identity. And that really strengthened my mission. But of course, these are obstacles, because when you deal with that in education, and when you are very young, you often do not know how to deal with that, and many of us can relate to that. And now, like, since I start to work for the police in the Netherlands, in the commissioner staff, and now in the European Parliament, I can see that this really helped me, my identity and my knowledge about my identity, to transform that into policies, to transform that into legislation, and new instruments to tackle discrimination and racism in our society. So my own experience is very, very valuable, but I do need to say that, you know, not many people look like me in the EU institutions. So it also makes it a bit hard to sometimes be the only one, or you're just with a few that are making this point. So it can also be a bit lonely sometimes.
Yeah, I suppose it's part of all of our mission to really empower more people to enter politics, to not make it seem like a sort of very difficult alien concept, but to actually open up these avenues. And I mean, we've been doing that with EJS as well, by hosting EU activism seminars and by bringing people into the European Parliament every year to show them how it works, to allow them to meet politicians, and to really show them that, you know, it is possible to get involved. There are ways. It's important that you speak up on issues that you're interested in. So do you feel like your identity has driven a lot of your work in the European Parliament? Obviously, you're on various committees. You're on the Women's Rights Committee and the International Trade Committee. Do you feel like this is an active part of your work, empowering more diverse communities to join the European Parliament, and sort of how do you do that? What's the best way?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, one of my most important mission is to really build this new coalition in Europe, like a new coalition of people that can really relate to the story about Europe, and that can really relate with the work that we are doing in our EU institutions, because representation is so extremely important. So yes, that's one of my biggest missions. And you know, you can do that by doing things differently. And in my personal experience, that is by being progressive, being creative, being renewing in the proposals that I do in all the committees that I am. So I basically, and I find it also really fun to do, so I always see where I can touch upon subjects or questions that have not been discussed or have not been raised yet. Like, for example, in the trade committee, I am working on trade and gender, for example. So I really want the trade agreements to be an instrument to make women's rights better and to foster gender equality. So that's how I work. I'm trying to combine, you know, different kind of subjects to also show people that we do not mainstream enough. So, for example, we do not gender mainstream enough. We are not focused enough, I think, on the intersectionality. I'm really glad that Commissioner Dali is really focused on it right now. But, you know, just to make my point that we need to look at it differently. We need to raise different questions.
No, exactly. And I think embedding diversity into actual policy and into political process is really important, because a lot of the time we find ourselves that talking about diversity is sometimes in a vacuum, you know, and it sometimes feels like it's big ideas without actually much political implications. And I think, you know, the fact that you are trying to put intersectionality into the international trade aspect, into the political aspects of things, that's really important. So obviously you've been growing up as a Jewish Muslim in the Netherlands. What is the kind of kaleidoscope of your identities, and how do you feel having been growing up in such a diverse background? Do you feel, how do you express your Jewishness, and I suppose how do you relate the Jewishness and the Muslim identity as well?
Yeah, like I said, I'm really blessed, you know, that I got all these different identities. And at a certain point in my life, I just decided to accept it how it is, and to pay as much as attention to all the components I have in my identity. So, for example, the recent years, I've been doing more research also on my Jewish identity. I've been also looking for the bridge between the Jewish and the Muslim community, to see where we relate. We have so much things that we share, and I find that so beautiful. And that's really what I also hope to express by being me in politics in the European Parliament, to show that we can be together, we can work together. We have in the Netherlands, we have great examples of the Jewish and the Muslim community working together, and training the youth, you know, to be in peace with each other. And I think that's beautiful. I can really enjoy these kind of initiatives. So I think it's really the recent years that I decided that I'm going to do research on both of my identities. And, you know, some parts of my personal history has also been a bit confronting to me, very confronting, as in that, you know, you just know, and you find these things about your family, and what a part of your family has gone through. And yes, I think it's really important to know who you are. So I'm always very proud to say that I have both in me.
That's really inspiring as well. Having that curiosity that sort of opens up the doors. And I've been doing quite a bit of interfaith work as well when I was a community leader in Aberdeen. Basically, during the refugee crisis of 2015, we started this initiative, a cup of tea with a refugee, where basically the Jewish student community and the Muslim student community has invited the refugees in Aberdeen on campus, and initiated these sort of discussions about what identity means to us, and how do we feel about place. Have you had many inspiring sort of interfaith stories that have pushed your understanding of interfaith, or do you have any particular ideas how we can make interfaith work even better?
Yeah, well, personally, to me, I started to really speak to people from the different communities. I know a lot of people from the Jewish community, from the Muslim community, and I just started to ask questions about how things are and how they look at things. And these conversations really helped me to even more embrace my personal identity. But I also think that what we need to do more, and especially the youth, I think, do research on your identity. Very important to know who you are. It's also very important to be honest about how that part is confronting you. It might be, you know, your personal history or the history of your family that really can confront you in the things that you are experiencing now. And I think it's now very the time in our society to be more open and to have more space to have that conversation. Again, I think one of the best practices is that different groups are brought together and having these dialogues, and see how they can, for example, can tackle discrimination and racism together.
I just see that someone said there are issues with the sound.
Yeah, I don't know if it's me or...
Yeah, I mean, I can hear you perfectly. I'm not sure about other stuff that's going on, but just, yeah, if anyone else is experiencing issues, then just let us know and we'll try to fix it on the back end. So do you feel like European Parliament is doing enough in terms of attracting people from diverse backgrounds and really reflecting the diversity that Europe has? And if not, what are some of the ways actively that we, as young people, can sort of do to improve diversity in politics, to get more young people from diverse or left behind backgrounds to get interested? What are some of your thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, it definitely should be more. I'm so not satisfied right now with the representation in the EU institutions. So we lack diversity. I mean, as members of European Parliament, but let alone the staff that we have and that we need to work with, and the staff broader in the EU institutions. So it's just like, you know, it's like you are living in a different world, and at the same time, we are making all these policies and papers and legislation about people that are dealing with discrimination, exclusion, and racism in our society. So that is not right, and I'm really glad that von der Leyen recently, during the racism debate on racism in the European Parliament, really stated and recognized that, you know, they need to do much more to attract diversity. And Commissioner Dalli herself had, I think, a very good interview recently in the media about her also recognizing the problem and saying that the European Commission now is really speaking to also the senior managers, the high-level managers, to see what they can do in the upcoming time to attract more diversity. I mean, especially if we want to tackle anti-Semitism, if we want to tackle Islamophobia, racism in general, then you need to have people in your institutions that can really talk from experience, and are well connected with the community, and that can really bring this input back to the table.
No, exactly. And a lot of the time it's about ensuring that we have people for whom it's personal, because it's well and good to talk about diversity or tackling racism if you're a white middle class straight man, which, you know, is still the dominant type of MEP.
Yes.
So it's really important to. But what are some of the practical ways, maybe, that we as young Jewish leaders or people that perhaps aspire to get into politics, what are some of the ways in which we can encourage that process?
Well, first of all, you are doing already a great job. I mean, you've been contributing in the last years also to very important reports. The Fundamental Rights Agency does its reports regularly also on the status of the Jewish community in Europe. And what I'm really worried about is that we also see from the statistics that especially young Jewish Europeans are dealing and targeted with discrimination and racism. So, you know, it's very important that there's also like a young generation from the Jewish community in our EU institutions that can really tell the story and really can think with the solution. So it's very good what you're already doing. You're giving your input and your contribution to the surveys and the researches that are very important for us as the European Parliament, the Fundamental Rights Agency, for example. And we also did in 2017 in the European Parliament, we did a resolution also on the on tackling anti-Semitism. So these are all the kind of things that you can contribute to, and we need to make sure from the European Parliament and from the European Commission that we engage you proactively. And it's very good that you're already organizing these dialogues with other communities. I know that you are doing that. You are contacting other communities to see how you can think about the solutions and really work on peace. So I'm really glad that you do that, and please continue to do that. And at the same time, I just want to say that I really recognize your struggle, because I know that the youth is having difficult times, giving the numbers and the statistics that we have.
Well, exactly, and I suppose touching in that, our struggles are very much interconnected in terms of not just being parts of diverse communities, but also being young people in Europe these days, in the wake of, the biggest economic crisis in living memory. Obviously, you're in the Committee of International Trade, and you're an expert in the issues of, economic development, etc. What do you think is the future for young people in Europe at the moment? And how do we build this truly inclusive growth that will make sure that, young people, especially those from, BAME, ethnic minority backgrounds, and those less financially advantaged, how do we make sure that those people are not left behind, and that we can make sure that they can get into politics and, speak their story to build that fairer, more inclusive Europe?
Yeah, that's such an important question. In the European Parliament, we are now having the discussion in our own groups about the recovery plan and the long-term budget, because that all changed because of the corona crisis, of course, because of COVID-19. And we see that, for example, the youth, but also other marginalized groups in society will be targeted the most, and especially in terms of economically and socially. So I'm very glad that I'm also in the Committee on Social Affairs and Employment, where I can really raise these questions, and I'm involved and engaged with the recovery approach. So that is where we really need to come with the targeted measures and the targeted solutions, but also in terms of the funding. So, for example, when it comes to women, I already see that in the recovery plan, we have not paid enough attention to women and how, for example, the funding can facilitate them. So this is a process where we are in the European Parliament, and I'm very glad to see that a lot of members of European Parliament are very sharp on having the right and inclusive solutions for the people that are targeted the most. And when it comes to the youth, we need to have like a special plan for the youth in Europe when it comes to the recovery of jobs and their future, but also in terms of education, because a lot of young people missed out, also vulnerable youth. These are all topics that I've been, writing to the Commission about already. And, the European Parliament has its instrument and has its power to, at the end, use its voting rights and amend and asking impact assessments. That's very important, by the way. We need to ask a lot of impact assessments on women, on marginalized groups, on migrant communities, the Jewish community, the Muslim community, because we all see that there are already more negative consequences for these groups in our society. So that is what you can expect from us, from the European Parliament.
No, exactly, and I think the best way as well is when young people actually talk with their MEPs and participate in the political process rather than just being talked about. A lot of the time we see a process where young people are being patronized by politicians that are often just out of touch, and that's not because they're particularly evil or something, that they just don't have enough contact with young people. So what are some of the best ways perhaps for a young person in Belgium right now, in Bulgaria, or in Greece or wherever else to put real pressure on their politicians and to be heard? Because there's so much noise out there. What's the best way to kind of get out there and to be heard?
Always make noise, and always speak out. But for example, like what you are doing, it's very important that you have these kind of networks that you are in, and that you are, the creating, because like, for example, what we are doing now, that's very useful, and we've already met last year. I've met representatives of your organization, and that's really the trick. You need to leverage all these groups and networks, so that you can inform and advise us. So it's very important that you speak out and that you reach out to members of European Parliament, to your own politicians, and that you organize yourself, form a group, so that you have more more chances to be seen and to be heard, and please write to us and contact us, because we need all this information. And you know, let's not forget social media. Organize your own social media campaign, make sure that you are visible. Tag us, write us on social media. Please make use of all these instruments to make sure that we see you. But I promise you that I will do my best also to already proactively see you and find you. But please, if you think that we need to hear something, then approach us.
Exactly. It's all about just really taking the steps and to not be intimidated, and to understand that, you know, MEPs are there for you, and ultimately.
No, but we are there for you. So
exactly.
we need to listen to you. So.
Well, we're definitely very lucky to have a friend like you, and many other MEPs in our network. We're very honoured to be able to, you know, have that platform, and to bring young Jewish leaders, you know, with us to the European Parliament every year. It's a thing that we're undoubtedly going to continue after the Corona crisis is over, and it's definitely a huge part of our work. So I'm going to turn the conversation into human rights at the moment. We're slowly beginning to run out of time. We apparently only have half an hour, so about 10-15 minutes more. If people want to ask questions, then feel free to write comments in the chat. I'll read them out, and that's the way for Samira to answer them. Or obviously, you can also tweet Samira or message her on Instagram. What are your channels, in case people want to get in contact and ask any questions directly? I'll just share them sort of later on. So human rights is obviously a very important part of our work. So what is your understanding of human rights, and what is the one thing that Europe should be doing right now to further human rights in Europe and the world?
Yes, well, I'm in the Committee on Human Rights myself. And you know, that I'm still shocked by what's going on in the world, in Europe, in terms of violations of human rights and human rights not being respected. So in the Committee on Human Rights, I am going to try to raise all the necessary questions, and also be very critical on Europe itself. Like, what are we doing here in Europe? And are we protecting the fundamental rights enough also here in Europe? So, you know, I do think that, you know, when it comes to understanding human rights and the value of human rights, I do notice that sometimes we can be definitely more bold and definitely more sharp in terms of identifying where we see human rights violations. You know, if an individual is being undermined in its fundamental rights, then that individual cannot participate in all kinds of ways. And it's also about an individual not feeling equal, not feeling like, you know, being an equal part of society. And that's so extremely wrong. And I've seen from the security perspective also what that can do to people if you don't treat them right in society, or if you don't give them equal rights. If you violate their human rights, name for example ethnic profiling, then that does something to individuals, and it accumulates. So it starts to be, you know, it's going to begin, it's going to be a group, and a bigger group in society that's being excluded and violated in fundamental rights. And
it's an endless cycle as well, right?
It goes on and on. So I've seen from a security perspective how extremely important it is to have social policies and to respect human rights.
Absolutely, and obviously Europe's got a massive role to play in that, and we've seen that recently with the actions of the Polish government, something that I've got a particular connection to, with you know, the presidential campaign having become the sort of cesspit of anti-LGBT abuse, and it's basically become a referendum on LGBT rights, which it should never have become. this idea of marginalizing a community and just talking about them, and the idea of LGBT-free zones and stickers being distributed in regions of Poland.
Yes, it's terrible.
And same with Hungary as well. We've had that with attacks on the judiciary and blatant anti-Semitism and Islamophobia being used as a electoral card. So I suppose, what can the EU do concretely to reprimand those countries and to ensure that they don't overstep? And is the EU doing enough, and can it do enough? Is it within its power to actually do something concrete to make it stop?
Yes, and what you could see in the examples that you are mentioning right now, especially the COVID crisis, even made it worse. So it really looked like they took the possibility to make it even worse. So in Hungary, for example, we have the national parliament being, cut off, and they cannot even be their own parliament, for example. So it's what I do think, as being a new member of the European Parliament, what I really missed, and I'm really glad that my own delegation and my own party D66 in the Netherlands was actually one of the few who is already working on it for years now, to really make this very strong statement, and not only a statement, but really to use the instruments that we have in the EU to make sure that these member states don't violate fundamental rights of people. And we cannot respect that any longer anymore. So we really need to have this collective mindset in the European Parliament that we cannot accept this anymore. And if this goes on, we need to trigger the articles that can really make them feel that they need to stop with it. But these are decisions that you really need to make also very carefully, because so many people in these member states really need us, and so many people in these member states do want to be part of Europe. So these are careful decisions that you need to make. So I also understand it, but we also need to be more bold. Definitely.
I suppose, yeah, exactly. And I suppose a lot of that boldness comes from having lots of young people in the European Parliament, having people from diverse communities that understand firsthand, the impact of some of the hateful sort of racist policies that are being implemented in many of the national parliaments.
And one of the concrete examples, for example, what we can do in terms of, for example, the funding for civil society organizations that help and facilitate women in these member states. What we can decide, for example, is that the funding goes directly to the civil society organizations without the interruption of the government, for example, so that we are sure that they maintain to exist and that they can really do what they need to do. That's also an example of how
good idea. Yeah. No, I mean, that's exactly a very good point, and it's some of the ways of, bypassing the kind of governments that are clearly not acting in the interest of human rights.
And it's really sad that we need to do that, because it's a really bad message. It really means that it's not good at all.
Do you feel like Europe has to change its entire direction, its philosophy, perhaps have a new, maybe not a new constitution, not a new Maastricht, but a new sort of declaration that resets the Europe's mission and puts human rights first? Do you reckon that the COVID era calls for such a big, bold reset, or is it more of a way of just dealing with individual countries and using the mechanisms that exist already?
Well, I truly believe that the fundament that we are built upon is correct, is right. We very well know what our European values are, but we really need to walk the talk.
Exactly.
We need to live it. We need to act like it. So, and that's the thing. So it's a mindset, it's behavior, it's being more bold. It's having, it's about having zero tolerance when it comes to certain topics, like, violations of human rights. We should not negotiate about that.
Exactly.
So what I think is, and that's also why you are also very important, but we really need also a new generation in the institutions with a different mindset, being focused on a new future. and you know, strongly having that the peace in mind, and how we are going to work together in the future and bringing all these communities together.
Well, I hope that many of you watching, many of you
You know,
EUGS alumni
that's what we can do.
will join you one time in the European Parliament corridors and actually work together towards that change. And I deeply believe in this idea that anyone can join politics, that there are no barriers. And I hope that if you're watching and you're thinking about standing for office, do it.
Yes, do it.
Power to you. Do it.
It's
Actually,
also
just
a lot
go.
of fun. It really
Exactly.
is a lot of fun.
It's rewarding, and it's really important to have people like us in the corridors of power. I'm aware that you only had half an hour for this, so I'm not sure if you have 5-10 minutes longer to talk about
Yes,
racism.
I have 5 minutes more.
All right, okay. So I suppose just one question that's really pertinent and important for the times that we're living in. Obviously, we're very busy tackling anti-Semitism in all ways, whether that's sort of right-wing conspiracy theories or far-left conspiracy theories or BDS on campus and many issues like that.
Crimes,
but obviously,
yeah.
Black Lives Matter has amplified anti-racist struggles for many of us and has reawakened us to the urgency. You know, we've been seeing the murder of George Floyd and the brutality of that involved and been watching in horror. And I myself have participated in protests, and I'm sure I'll continue to do so. But what are some of the best ways for us as Jews and as Muslims and people from ethnic minorities to engage in anti-racist struggle, and how can we support Black people in achieving the justice that is so needed?
Yes, yes, it's really touching this question. You know, it's just be part of it. Be part of it. Give your support anyhow. In terms of, you know, being at a demonstration, for example, that you can show your support. You can do that in your own way, peacefully, of course. And but you can also, you know, organize these dialogues where you invite people to speak about it. You can come to them, they can come to you, but you know, it's really important that we feel like we are all part of it and that we are all responsible for it. And it's very important that if you can and if you want, that you speak out and show your support. Also, we have social media, so that's very powerful. And that really helps, because what you've now seen with the Black Lives Movement and the effect of that is because all these different people were part of that. You know, that's why it was so powerful and so strong. And keep doing that. Be part of it, and don't feel uncomfortable. Don't think that you don't have the right to be part of it. Really, if you really want to support the mission, and you know, and the thing is that we can relate. The different communities that you talk about now, we relate with each other. We can understand what the experiences are. We can understand what the effect is. So connect based on that. Make a connection based on the shared experiences.
Absolutely, and I think that's definitely the mission that we continue doing. You know, connecting people of different experiences and backgrounds and genders to really make sure that we, you know, build that Europe that's free from racism at some point. And that's our mission, and we're not going to stop. I suppose I'll just end with one final question about education, because obviously a lot of us have been stepping up to educate ourselves on the issues of anti-Black discrimination, and we've been reading a lot about the legacy of empires in Europe and the legacy of colonialism and some of the systemic issues that have created problems of racism. Do you have any recommended reads or resources to educate ourselves further on sort of anti-Black racism in general? And do you have any particular tools that will enable us to be better activists in our communities and beyond that?
Yes. Well, what I think the most important thing is that you really do research based on the recent researches and documents and statistics that we have. You know, the Fundamental Rights Agency is very important, but we have so many other agencies and organizations like Amnesty International, you name it. We have ENAR, we have our own RD Intergroup that in the European Parliament that has done so much research. And why I say, please invest in having a look at these researchers is because then you can understand also the statistics and the numbers behind what people are doing and what they are saying. So it's very important also to invest in that, so that you have very concrete examples. And you know, it's very easy to find also. So please do that. I think the knowledge and the facts, to have that is very important to have the discussion. And you know, one of my, when it really comes to having like a peaceful mind and looking at the, how to look at the world, you know, I myself am very I really love Maya Angelou, with a very beautiful philosophic way of looking at life. And you know, the recent weeks, it was really confronting for me and very, very personal. And I noticed that I was actually reading a lot of her quotes, and about how she looks at life. So so you know, I can definitely relate to having, you know, the need to do your own research, but also to
reflect and to sort of step back.
read, yes, and to read things about people and role models that you find important, as in terms of getting the right mindset.
Great. Well, I can say for sure that you're definitely a role model for many of us, and for EJS and what we are, you know, being one of the youngest and most diverse members of the European Parliament. And we've run out of time, but it's been a massive honour to chat to you in this first ever MEP interview on Instagram Live. I hope that we'll do many more of these, and hopefully see you in the European Parliament at some point on many of our events.
Please come visit me again after the Corona crisis, when visitors are allowed again. Then
yeah, we're going to get through this. We're going to get through this. Well, thank you so much for joining us, Samira. It's been a pleasure, and stay tuned for future interviews from EJS.
Thank you.
Keep well.
Bye.
All right. Bye, everyone.